Shannon had already buried her husband and her newborn son after the fire. The baptism in Savannah wasn't about tradition. It was about saying goodbye, about placing a drop of holy water where a lifetime should have been. She walked into that quiet church, carrying grief like glass in her chest. But before the ceremony could begin, something happened. Something small, careless, and cruel that shattered more than her faith. It changed how she would see her family forever. The church in Savannah was small, white-bricked, and quiet in the way only old Southern churches can be. Morning light filtered through stained glass in soft blues and ambers, settling gently over the polished wooden pews. A faint scent of lilies lingered near the altar. The baptismal font stood at the front, a simple stone basin filled with clear, still water. Shannon sat in the second pew, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. She wore black, not dramatic, not defiant, just simple. The pastor spoke softly about remembrance, about entrusting what we love to God's keeping. His voice was kind, careful, the kind of voice people use around fragile things. This baptism wasn't traditional. There was no infant dressed in white, no photographs waiting to be taken. It was a blessing for a child who had lived only days. A ceremony for a son lost in the same fire that had taken her husband. The doors creaked open, heads turned. Her parents slipped inside as if they were arriving for a luncheon rather than a memorial. Her father adjusted his blazer, scanning the room with mild impatience. Her mother's heels clicked against the tile. And behind them, Renee, perfect hair, perfect posture, took in the sparse gathering with visible confusion. They were late. Shannon felt it immediately. The shift in air pressure, the intrusion of something louder than grief. The pastor paused politely. "We're just beginning," he said with gentle diplomacy. Her father nodded as though he'd been personally inconvenienced. He leaned down slightly toward Shannon as he slid into the pew behind her. "We hit traffic," he murmured. Not apologetic. Didn't realize this was going to be all this. Shannon kept her eyes forward. The pastor resumed. He lifted a small silver cup and began speaking about the symbolism of water, cleansing, renewal, eternal life. Her father exhaled audibly. "So this is it," he whispered, though not quietly enough. "All this ceremony for a baby who's already gone. We could have done something simpler. A barbecue, maybe. Something less theatrical." The word hung in the air. Barbecue. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back inhaled sharply. And then Renee laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't hysterical. It was worse than that. A quick, careless burst of amusement she didn't quite manage to swallow. As if the absurdity of holy water and mourning clothes had simply tickled her. Shannon felt something inside her change. Up until that moment, she had been brittle, hollowed out, moving through grief, like someone underwater. But now the water felt different. The pastor dipped his fingers into the font, preparing to speak her son's name. Behind her, her father continued, voice edged with impatience. "You've dragged everyone down here for this. You need to start moving on Shannon. Marcus is gone. The baby is gone. This," he gestured vaguely toward the altar, "isn't going to bring them back." Renee leaned forward slightly. "Dad's just saying maybe this isn't healthy." "Healthy?" The word echoed. The pastor stopped speaking. Silence spread across the sanctuary. No longer gentle, but tight. Shannon rose slowly. For a moment, no one understood what she was doing. Her movements were calm, almost deliberate. She stepped toward the baptismal font. The surface of the water trembled faintly as her fingers touched it. She turned. Her face wasn't tear-streaked anymore. It wasn't shattered. It was steady. "You don't get to decide what's healthy for me," she said quietly. Her father frowned. "Shannon, sit down. You're making a scene." A scene? Her voice didn't rise. It sharpened. "You walked into my son's baptism and joked about a barbecue. It was just a figure of speech," he snapped. Renee crossed her arms. "You're overreacting." Shannon looked at them, really looked at them, at the impatience, the embarrassment, the inconvenience written across their faces. Then, without another word, she dipped her hand fully into the font and flung the water outward. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't wild, but droplets scattered across her father's blazer, across Renee's perfectly styled hair, across her mother's silk sleeve. Gasps filled the church. The holy water slid down their faces in thin, glistening lines. "If this means nothing to you," Shannon said, her voice steady as stone, "then you don't belong here." Her father surged to his feet. "Have you lost your mind?" Her mother stood too, hissing her name in warning. Renee wiped her cheeks, stunned. "This is insane." Maybe it was. But for the first time since the fire, Shannon did not feel small. She stepped away from the font, past the pastor who watched her with quiet understanding, past the pews, past the lilies and stained glass, and the place that had been meant for farewell. Her father's voice rose behind her, anger replacing mockery. "Shannon, you come back here right now." She didn't. The heavy church doors opened and bright Savannah sunlight spilled across the floor as she walked out, leaving the confrontation swelling behind her in the hush she no longer felt obligated to protect. The humid Savannah air hit her like a wall. Shannon barely made it down the church steps before the doors burst open behind her. "Have you completely lost your mind?" her father demanded. His voice carried across the small parking lot, sharp enough to draw the attention of the few remaining guests lingering near their cars. Her mother hurried after him, clutching her purse like a shield. Renee followed last, dabbing at her damp sleeve with a tissue, her expression equal parts outrage and disbelief. "You humiliated us," her mother said, her voice tight and trembling, not with sadness, but with fury, in front of a pastor, in front of strangers. Shannon turned slowly. The church doors swung shut behind them, muting the world back into cicada hum and distant traffic. "You mocked my son," she said evenly. Her father threw up his hands. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Shannon. It was a comment, a joke. You're so determined to be offended that you can't see when someone is trying to lighten the mood." "Lighten the mood," she repeated. Renee stepped forward, her tone soft in a way that felt rehearsed. "We're worried about you." There it was, the pivot. "You've been through something traumatic," Renee continued gently. "No one is denying that, but throwing holy water at Dad, that's not grief, that's instability." The words slid between them. Her mother nodded quickly. "Sweetheart, this isn't you. You've been fragile since the fire. We've all noticed it. Fragile, as if grief were a character flaw, as if mourning were a performance that had gone on too long." "I needed that ceremony," Shannon said. "And we showed up," her father snapped. "Late or not, we were there. And you repaid us by making a spectacle of yourself." "Of myself?" she asked quietly. Renee sighed, tilting her head with clinical sympathy. Have you considered talking to someone, a professional, I mean? Therapy might help you process this anger before it gets worse. Before it gets worse, as if she were a problem escalating. Her mother reached for her hand, but Shannon didn't let her take it. We're saying this because we care. You're not thinking clearly. You're isolating yourself. Today proved that. Today proved something she thought, but not what they believed. You need help, her father said flatly. And until you get it, don't expect us to keep indulging these episodes. The cicadas buzzed louder in the silence that followed. Shannon looked at the three of them, so aligned, so certain, not cruel in their own minds, concerned, reasonable, united against her. I'm not unstable, she said softly. I'm grieving. And we're grieving too, her mother insisted. But we don't let it turn us into someone unrecognizable. The word landed deeper than the others. Without another response, Shannon turned and walked to her car. This time, no one followed. She drove without turning on the radio. The road blurred past in sun-washed streaks of asphalt and Spanish moss. Her hands rested steady on the steering wheel, but something inside her felt newly unmoored. All her life, she had believed in one unshakable truth. Family might argue, might misunderstand, but they stood together when it mattered. Today, in that small white church, she had stood alone. They hadn't seen a mother blessing her dead child. They had seen an inconvenience, an embarrassment, a woman who needed managing. The thought didn't break her. It unsettled her. As she pulled into her driveway, the quiet of the house, waiting ahead, felt different than it had that morning. Less like sanctuary, more like space. For the first time, a thin crack ran through her certainty about loyalty. And once you see a crack, she realized, you can't unsee it. The envelope arrived 3 days after the baptism. It was ordinary, off-white, corporate. The return address printed neatly in the upper left corner. Stellar Mutual Insurance. Shannon almost left it on the kitchen counter with the rest of the mail. Bills, grocery coupons, a sympathy card she hadn't opened yet. She made tea first, sat down, let the steam rise between her and the world. Only then did she slide her finger under the flap. Inside was a single formal letter and a copy of a beneficiary designation form. She read the first paragraph once, then again. We are writing to confirm the recent update to the beneficiary designation on policy number 44721-A, previously held by Marcus Hale. Her eyes moved more slowly after that. As per documentation submitted 6 weeks prior to the incident, the primary beneficiary has been changed. From Shannon Hale's spouse to Daniel and Patricia Hale, parents of policyholder, 6 weeks prior. Her brain resisted the timeline. 6 weeks before the fire, Marcus had been repainting the nursery, arguing over crib brands, laughing about how neither of them knew how to install a car seat. 6 weeks before the fire, he had kissed her forehead in the kitchen and said, "If anything ever happens to me, you and the baby are covered." I made sure, covered. Her fingers tightened around the paper. There must be a mistake. Insurance companies made clerical errors all the time. Names got swapped, forms got misfiled. Someone had entered the wrong code into the wrong system. Her breathing remained steady, controlled. She turned to the attached copy of the beneficiary change form. The document looked official. Typed fields, policy number, dates. And at the bottom, Marcus's signature. She stared at it. It was close. Similar. The looping M. The long tail on the S. But something about it felt rigid. Marcus's handwriting had always slanted slightly forward as though in a hurry. This signature stood upright, almost careful, deliberate. She stood and walked to the hallway drawer where they kept old paperwork. Mortgage documents, hospital forms, birthday cards he'd signed over the years. She spread them across the dining table and compared. There it was. The difference wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. The curve in the H, the way he connected the A and the L. The insurance form looked like someone trying to remember his signature, not someone writing it naturally. Her pulse began to hum in her ears. Below the signature line was a witness verification section. A second signature, smaller, neater. Patricia Hale, her mother-in-law. Shannon felt the first real tremor of something colder than grief. Why would Marcus change his beneficiary to his parents? He wouldn't, not without telling her. Not without a conversation, an explanation, a fight even. 6 weeks before the fire, they had been arguing about paint colors, not estate restructuring. She sat back down slowly. The letter stated that the request had been processed electronically through an authorized account login. Proper identification confirmed. Documentation validated. Validated? Her mind ran through possibilities, each one thinning. Could Marcus have done this privately? Secretly, had he doubted her, feared something she hadn't seen? No. The certainty came quietly, but it came. Marcus trusted her with everything. Passwords, bank accounts, his unfinished drafts, his fear of becoming a father. And then another thought surfaced. Access. Who had access? Her in-laws had visited often during her pregnancy. They had stayed in the guest room, used the home office computer. Her mother-in-law had once insisted on organizing their filing cabinet while Shannon was resting. A memory flickered Patricia, sitting at the dining table with a stack of documents, smiling thinly. It's important to keep paperwork tidy. You never know when you'll need it. Shannon looked back down at the form, the witness signature, the tight controlled loops. Her stomach dropped. She walked to her desk and pulled out a birthday card Patricia had sent the previous year. Inside a neat inscription, "With love, always." The P was unmistakable, the narrow oval of the A, the clipped tail of the E. It matched, not identical. No two signatures ever are, but close enough that denial began to feel dishonest. This wasn't clerical. It wasn't confusion. It was deliberate. Someone had accessed Marcus's policy, submitted a change, signed his name, witnessed it themselves. 6 weeks before the fire, her hands went cold. The timeline rearranged itself in her mind, no longer chaotic, but chillingly precise. The late-night visits, the sudden questions about financial planning, the way Patricia had once asked, almost casually, "Are you sure Marcus has everything set up the way he should?" At the time, Shannon had thought it was typical parental anxiety. Now it felt like reconnaissance. She pressed her palm flat against the table to steady herself. This wasn't about money. It was about intent. Someone had anticipated his death enough to move quickly, quietly, legally, on paper. Her throat tightened, not with tears, but with clarity. They hadn't just dismissed her grief. They had positioned themselves around it, The crack in her belief about family widened into something unmistakable. This wasn't misunderstanding. It wasn't overprotection. It wasn't concern. It was betrayal. Her phone rang just as the light outside began to fade. Shannon almost ignored it. The day had already stripped her raw. She didn't want another voice telling her what she should feel. But when she saw the name on the screen, Trisha, she answered. Aunt Trisha. There was no small talk, no gentle preamble. Shannon, her aunt, said quietly, "I need you to listen to me without interrupting." Something in her tone made Shannon sit down. "I didn't know how to tell you this at the church," Trisha continued, "and I wasn't sure if I should get involved. But after what I heard yesterday, you deserve the truth." Shannon's chest tightened. What truth? There was a pause. "Then I was at your parents' house last week. I went upstairs to find the bathroom and I heard them in the study. Your mother and Renee, they didn't know I was there." The room felt smaller. They were talking about the insurance payout. The words landed softly but detonated. "I didn't mean to record it," Trisha added quickly. "At first I just pulled out my phone because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But then I realized you might need proof." A message notification buzzed on Shannon's screen, an audio file. Her fingers hovered above it. "I'm so sorry," Trisha whispered. "Just listen." The call ended. For a long moment, Shannon stared at the file. The screen reflected her face, back at her drawn, hollow, but steady. Then she pressed play. At first, there was only static and the faint scrape of a chair. Then her mother's voice. "We had to do it before anything happened. Marcus would never have changed it if she'd known." Shannon's breath stopped. Renee responded, her tone light, almost amused. Of course he wouldn't. Shannon always had him wrapped around her finger. A rustle of papers. Her mother again sharper now. "It's not about that. It's about security. If something happened, that money would have disappeared into whatever emotional spiral she fell into." Renee laughed softly. "Please. She can barely get out of bed some days. You saw her at dinner last month, staring into space like a ghost." A pause. Then the sentence that hollowed the air. "She's too broken to fight back," her mother said. "By the time she figures it out, if she ever does, it'll already be settled." The room around Shannon seemed to tilt. "Too broken." Renee exhaled. "And if she throws a fit, she won't," her mother replied calmly. "She doesn't have the strength. Grief makes people compliant." Compliant? There was the clink of glass. Ice shifting in a drink. "We deserve that money," Renee added. "Marcus was our son, not hers." The words hit harder than the rest. Not hers. As if marriage were temporary. As if the baby she had not bound them into something permanent. Her mother's voice softened, almost reflective. "It's unfortunate, of course, but sometimes you have to be practical." Shannon isn't thinking clearly. We are. The recording ended in a faint scrape and silence. Shannon didn't realize she was shaking until her phone slipped slightly in her hand. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly, too broken to fight back. The phrases replayed, looping over one another until they blurred. For weeks, she had wondered if they were right. If maybe she had become unstable, oversensitive, dramatic. She had questioned her own reactions, replayed the church scene in her mind, searching for evidence of imbalance. Now she understood something with piercing clarity. They had counted on that doubt. They had built their plan on her grief. The devastation came first. A clean, sharp grief that felt different from the fire. This wasn't loss of chance or accident. This was calculation. Her mother's voice steady and deliberate, arranging her future like paperwork. She pressed her palm against her sternum, waiting for the collapse. It didn't come. Instead, something colder settled into place. They believed she wouldn't fight. They believed she couldn't. Her mind replayed the signature on the insurance form, the careful loops, the deliberate witness line. This hadn't been panic. It had been preparation. A long breath left her lungs slow and controlled. The trembling in her hands eased. She walked to the sink, poured a glass of water, and drank it down as if sealing something inside herself. Too broken to fight back. The words no longer stung. They clarified. For the first time since the fire, her thoughts aligned into something sharp and steady. Not frantic, not hysterical. Focused. They had mistaken grief for weakness. They had mistaken silence for surrender. She looked around the quiet kitchen, the house that had held laughter and smoke and ash. The house where she had once believed loyalty was automatic. A different truth replaced it now. Strength didn't always look like shouting in a church. Sometimes it looked like listening carefully, saving the file, and deciding very quietly that you are no longer fragile. Grant's office overlooked the Savannah River sunlight, glinting off the water in quiet, indifferent flashes. The building itself was modest brick exterior. Narrow hallway, the faint scent of old paper and coffee lingering in the air. She hadn't seen Grant since the funeral. He stood when she entered, his expression shifting from polite professionalism to something more personal. Shannon. He didn't hug her. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "I'm glad you called." Grant had been Marcus's college roommate before he became an attorney. He had toasted at their wedding, helped them negotiate their mortgage. He was one of the few people Shannon still instinctively trusted. She placed her phone on the desk. "I need you to listen to something," she said. He nodded once. Okay. The audio played between them, filling the quiet office with voices that no longer felt distant. Her mother, Renee, calm, strategic. Grant didn't interrupt. He didn't react visibly. He listened with his hands folded loosely in front of him, gaze steady. When the recording ended, silence settled. "That's consent to commit fraud," he said finally, voice level, and an admission of intent. Shannon swallowed. Hearing it framed so plainly made it real in a new way. She slid the insurance letter across the desk next. He read carefully, line by line. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when he reached the beneficiary change date. 6 weeks before the fire, he murmured. "Yes. Did Marcus ever mention updating his policy number?" Grant leaned back slightly. "Okay, let's look at the actual filing." He turned to his computer, logging into the state insurance registry portal. His fingers moved efficiently, the clicks of the keyboard sharp and rhythmic. He requested a certified digital copy of the beneficiary change submission. They waited in silence while the file loaded. When it appeared on screen, he angled the monitor toward her. "This is the electronic submission record," he explained. "Timestamp, IP address, digital authentication trail." He zoomed in on the signature block. At first glance, it was identical to the paper copy she had received. But Grant clicked another tab. "This shows the verification method used," he said. It wasn't signed in person. It was uploaded as a scanned document. He opened the metadata panel. Here he pointed. The file was created on a home desktop, not through the insurance company's secure digital signature system. Shannon felt her pulse slow into something controlled. "Can you tell where?" she asked. He nodded once. "The IP address traces back to a residential provider in Savannah." He typed again, cross-referencing. The address appeared, her in-laws' home. Grant didn't look surprised. He opened a second window and pulled up Marcus's previous authenticated signatures from older filings. Digital signatures through the insurance portal generate an encrypted certificate, he said calmly. This one doesn't have that. It's a scanned image pasted into the form. He compared the two side by side. See the difference in pixel layering here? He pointed gently. The signature was lifted from another document and inserted. Lifted. Inserted. Not a moment of weakness. Not a misunderstanding. Constructed. Grant leaned back, folding his hands again. This isn't just a disputed beneficiary change, he said. This is criminal fraud. Identity falsification. Potential wire fraud depending on how the funds were processed. The words might have felt overwhelming once. Now they felt clarifying, so they can't claim it was confusion. Shannon said quietly. No, Grant replied. The recording shows intent. The metadata shows fabrication. The IP trace shows location. It's clean. Clean. She hadn't expected that word to bring comfort. Grant met her gaze fully, then not as a lawyer, but as someone who had known her husband. Shannon, I need you to understand something. This isn't about emotion anymore. It's about evidence. She nodded. He closed the laptop gently. We'll file an injunction immediately to freeze the payout if it hasn't already been dispersed. Then we petition the court to invalidate the beneficiary change based on fraud. And the recording, we submit it with a sworn affidavit from your aunt confirming how she obtained it. It establishes motive and knowledge. Shannon inhaled slowly. For the first time since opening that envelope, she felt the ground steady beneath her feet. Grant's voice softened slightly. You don't have to fight them loudly. You don't have to prove you're not broken. We let the evidence speak. Let the evidence speak. The phrase settled into her like a spine. They thought I wouldn't look, she said. They counted on that, he replied evenly. A quiet understanding passed between them. Grant reached for a legal pad and began outlining the steps. Temporary restraining order, civil complaint referral to the district attorney's office. Each line precise, ordered. No theatrics, no vengeance, just process. When he finished, he slid the paper toward her. We start today, he said. Shannon looked at the list, at the clarity of it. Not fragile, not compliant. Prepared. Okay, she said. And together they began preparing for legal action. The courtroom inside Savannah City Hall was smaller than Shannon expected. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, cutting pale rectangles across the polished floor. The room smelled faintly of paper and old wood. A ceiling fan turned lazily overhead, its rhythm steady, indifferent. Shannon sat beside Grant at the petitioner's table. Her hands rested loosely in her lap, not clenched, not trembling. Across the aisle sat Daniel and Patricia Hale. Her father's jaw was set tight, a performance of calm stretched over irritation. Patricia's posture was rigid pearls perfectly aligned at her collarbone. Renee sat beside them, chin lifted, lips pressed thin with impatience rather than fear. They looked composed. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered a woman in her late 50s with sharp glasses and a gaze that missed very little. She took her seat without flourish. Case 22 CV 4817, the clerk read. Petitioner Shannon Hale versus Daniel and Patricia Hale. The judge glanced down at the file, then up at the room. Counsel, she said. Grant stood. His voice was steady, unhurried. Your Honor, this case concerns the fraudulent alteration of a life insurance beneficiary designation 6 weeks prior to the decedent's death. He laid out the timeline carefully. 6 weeks before the fire beneficiary change submitted. Date of death confirmed. Insurance notification received. He spoke without drama, without emphasis. Just facts aligned like stepping stones. Exhibit A, he said, placing a certified copy of the electronic submission into evidence. The alleged change of beneficiary. He approached the bench briefly, then returned. Exhibit B, metadata analysis, confirming the signature was uploaded as a scanned image, not executed through the insurer's secure digital verification system. Shannon kept her gaze forward. Across the room, her father shifted in his seat. Grant continued. Exhibit CIP trace, connecting the submission to the respondent's residential address. A flicker passed over Patricia's face, quick, almost invisible. The judge looked over her glasses. Respondents. Her father stood abruptly. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. My son intended to provide for his parents. We were simply assisting with paperwork. Assisting, the judge asked mildly. Patricia rose more carefully. Marcus trusted us. Shannon has been unstable since the fire. We were trying to ensure everything was handled responsibly. There it was again. Unstable. The word no longer pierced. It floated past her like smoke. Grant didn't react. Your Honor, we also submit an audio recording obtained lawfully which demonstrates knowledge and intent regarding the beneficiary alteration. A ripple moved through the room. Renee's composure tightened. The judge nodded once. Play it. The courtroom seemed to shrink as the recording began. Static, then Patricia's voice unmistakable. We had to do it before anything happened. Marcus would never have changed it if she'd known. The words echoed against the wood-paneled walls. Daniel stared straight ahead. Renee's posture stiffened. The next line followed. She's too broken to fight back. A quiet intake of breath from someone in the back row. Grant stood still beside Shannon, not looking at her, not looking at them, just letting the recording unfold. We deserve that money, Renee's voice said from the speaker. Marcus was our son, not hers. The judge's expression hardened. Across the aisle, color drained from Patricia's face. She doesn't have the strength, Patricia's recorded voice continued. Grief makes people compliant. Compliant? The recording ended. Silence pressed into the space it left behind. For a long moment, no one moved. The judge folded her hands. Respondents, do you dispute the authenticity of this recording? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. Patricia's lips parted, but no words formed. Renee stood suddenly, chair scraping harshly against the floor. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You can't just... This was taken out of context. Ms. Hale, the judge said sharply, you will remain seated. But Renee didn't. She grabbed her purse, face flushed, and strode toward the aisle. The door swung open and shut behind her with a hollow thud. The sound lingered. Daniel's shoulders sagged slightly, the first crack in the facade. Patricia sank back into her chair. Shannon felt none of the surge she might once have imagined. No triumph, no vindication, only stillness. They had believed she wouldn't stand here, that she would doubt herself long enough for the paperwork to settle. Instead, their own voices now filled the official record. The judge looked down at the documents again, then at Grant. I am adjourning briefly to review the exhibits in full, she said. This court will reconvene this afternoon. The gavel struck once, sharp, decisive. As people began to rise, murmur shift, Shannon remained seated for a moment longer. Across the aisle, Her father avoided her eyes. Patricia stared at the tabletop. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. And Shannon felt nothing but the steady rhythm of her own breath as the hearing closed around them. When court reconvened that afternoon inside Savannah City Hall, the room felt smaller. The judge's voice was measured, almost restrained. The court finds sufficient evidence of fraudulent misrepresentation and intentional falsification of a beneficiary designation. There was no dramatic pause, no raised tone. The beneficiary change is hereby declared null and void. The original designation naming Shannon Hale as primary beneficiary is reinstated effective immediately. The matter is referred to the district attorney for further review. It was over in less than 3 minutes. Restored. That was the word Grant used later. Assets restored. Policy reinstated. Legal standing affirmed. But Shannon didn't feel restored. She felt clarified. In the weeks that followed, consequences unfolded quietly. An internal investigation opened at her father's accounting firm once the referral became public record. Clients withdrew. He was placed on administrative leave, then formally dismissed. Patricia, who had served on the board of a local charitable foundation, stepped down amid personal reasons that everyone understood but no one explained. Renee's situation unraveled fastest. Her employer, sensitive to reputational risk, terminated her contract within days of the news surfacing. The recording had traveled further than any of them expected. Private words rarely stay private once entered into court transcripts. There were rumors of a federal inquiry, questions about wire fraud. Shannon did not follow the details closely. She heard through distant relatives that tension settled heavily inside her parents' home. Arguments replaced strategy. Blame replaced certainty. Eventually, Daniel moved into a short-term rental on the south side of town. Separation, someone said in a hushed voice. Shannon felt no satisfaction, no flicker of triumph, only the steady understanding that actions carry weight. The money transferred into her account weeks later. The number on the screen was large enough to change a life, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a responsibility Marcus had intended for her all along. She walked through the house one last time that evening. The nursery that had never held a crib for long. The kitchen where paint samples still lingered in the corner. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like memory. Clarity does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. She contacted a realtor the next morning. It was time to sell the old house. It was time to begin again. The apartment overlooked the bend of the Savannah River, where cargo ships moved slowly past like deliberate thoughts. It was small. 1 bedroom, narrow kitchen, a balcony just wide enough for a chair and a potted fern. In the mornings, light poured through the east-facing windows, pale and forgiving. It touched the hardwood floors and climbed the white walls without asking permission. There were no scorch marks here, no half-painted nursery, no ghosts tucked into corners. Shannon kept the furniture minimal, a linen sofa, a wooden table, a bookshelf with only what she chose to carry forward. She discovered she liked empty space. It allowed her to breathe. She began working part-time at a design studio downtown, a quiet brick building with tall windows and long drafting tables. The work was precise and creative in equal measure. Layout adjustments, color palettes, client mock-ups. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy. Her co-workers knew only that she had moved recently. They did not know about fires or courtrooms or recordings played in public rooms. They knew she met deadlines, that she preferred natural light, that she drank tea in the afternoons. Some evenings she walked along the riverfront. The water carried reflections of gold and copper at sunset. Tourists drifted past laughing, unaware of the quiet recalibrations happening inside her. One night, an email arrived from Grant. Subject line, just checking in. She opened it on the balcony, the river dark and steady below. "You did the right thing," he wrote. "Not just legally, personally. Standing up for yourself doesn't make you hard, it makes you whole." She read the sentence twice. Whole. For so long she had defined herself relationally. Someone's daughter, someone's wife, someone's sister-in-law. Roles layered over her like borrowed coats. Now, sitting alone with the hum of the river and the soft glow from her kitchen behind her, she felt something quieter forming. Not independence as rebellion, identity as choice. She was not fragile. She was not an extension. She was a woman who had endured loss, uncovered truth, and decided to keep moving. The river did not rush. It flowed. And for the first time in a long while, so did she. 1 year later, Shannon wakes before the alarm. The townhouse she purchased sits a few blocks from the Savannah River, close enough that she can hear the low horn of cargo ships some mornings. The space is modest but intentional. Clean lines, warm wood-wide windows that gather light instead of blocking it. She works full-time now as a claims analyst for a regional insurance firm. The irony is not lost on her. Each day she reviews documentation, verifies signatures, traces inconsistencies. She understands how easily paperwork can be manipulated and how powerful it becomes when examined closely. Her supervisors value her precision, her restraint. She does not speak more than necessary in meetings, but when she does, it is measured. Evidence matters. Clarity matters. She no longer checks her phone expecting an apology. Months ago, she blocked her parents' numbers. Renee's too. There were a few attempts at contact, brief emails framed as concern. One letter suggesting reconciliation for the sake of family. She did not respond. Silence is not cruelty, she has learned. Sometimes it is boundary. On her walk to work, she passes a small brick church on the corner of Bay Street. Its white doors stand open on Sundays, hymns drifting faintly into the air. The first time she passed it, her chest tightened. Now it doesn't. She does not flinch at the sight of stained glass. She does not hear the echo of mocking laughter. The memory of that day exists, but it no longer defines the room. Grief has changed shape. It is no longer a storm. It is a quiet tide that rises and recedes without warning. Some evenings, she sits by her window and thinks of Marcus's crooked smile, of the baby she never got to watch grow. The ache remains, but it is softer, threaded with gratitude rather than rage. She understands something now that she didn't a year ago. Healing is not loud. It does not arrive with declarations or apologies or cinematic closure. It arrives in routines, in paychecks deposited, in groceries carried up narrow stairs, in the absence of chaos. Her life is smaller than it once seemed, and steadier. She has stopped asking why it happened, stopped rehearsing alternate timelines in her head. There is no triumph in what unfolded, no revenge that tastes sweet, only endurance, only the quiet decision repeated daily to keep living honestly. Sometimes at dusk, she stands on her small balcony and watches the river move in patient silence. The current does not fight the bends in its path. It curves, adjusts, continues. She used to think grace was something granted. Now she knows it can be something lived. Not perfection, not vindication, just survival with integrity intact. And as the light fades over the water, Shannon understands something simple and unshakable. Survival itself is grace. Sometimes betrayal doesn't shout, it whispers, dressed as concern. And sometimes strength doesn't look like revenge, it looks like boundaries, held quietly and consistently. Shannon's story reminds us that grief and courage can exist in the same breath. What would you have done in her place? I'd truly like to know. If stories like this speak to you about resilience, truth, and starting over, stay with us. There are more journeys worth reflecting on together.